Hello, everyone. I hope and pray that you're doing well. Some folks have been asking about this, so I just wanted to give a bit of an update about where we're at with the Terrace CRC and our COVID safety plan. And maybe it's important for me to remind myself, to remind yourselves, just to frame our lives and this pandemic within God's providence. And we certainly continue to see God's hand even in the midst of COVID challenges. And I'm appreciative the Heidelberg Catechism reminds us with these words: God's providence is his almighty and ever-present power, whereby as with his hand he still upholds heaven and earth and all creatures. And for that we're grateful. And we're also grateful that throughout this pandemic, our COVID safety team and council have been following the BC Centre for Disease Control's guidelines. That's been kind of a relief that we've just kept pointing and utilizing their advice for implementation as a church. It's kept us focused. And what the CDC reiterated this week is that there are still no capacity limits or restrictions on indoor or outdoor religious gatherings and worship services in our province. Worship services are exempt from the provincial mask mandate, which requires masks in indoor public spaces. And worship services are also exempt from the requirement to provide proof of immunization needed for some events and services and businesses. Having said that, there are still some important precautions that we're trying to make as a church and which CDC points out that we should pay attention to. So certainly, continue to assess your health if you're going to come to church, to the church building for worship. If you have any symptoms, if you're feeling at all unwell, just please stay home. And also, clean your hands. This is not new. There's a way to do that as soon as you come in the building when you enter the worship space, and also maybe a wise thing to do after the worship service as well. We're certainly grateful for the level of protection that vaccines afford, and many people in our congregation have been vaccinated, and if you haven't, this is something that you might want to consider. Another thing is that wearing a mask continues to be recommended by the CDC for everybody 12 and older who attend worship services that aren't fully vaccinated. And we're going to continue with our regular and enhanced cleaning and disinfecting regime. And because masks are, kind of this further layer of protection, and they're required in other public indoor spaces, we shouldn't be surprised to come into the worship space even this Sunday and see more people wearing masks. And we want to reiterate that you're certainly welcome to do so, even though it's certainly not mandated. And we can expect that with events and programs ramping up for our church in the fall, we're probably going to need to continue to adjust our COVID safety protocols. And just some other reminders, continue to give people space. I've appreciated that, people have, when they've come to church, they're asking, before hugging and shaking hands even, that's a good policy overall, but it's obviously especially important during COVID times. And physically, there's enough space in our sanctuary that you can find seats to sit, where you're far away from people. Usually that's the front pew and often in the back corners. But if you want to be away from people, you can certainly do so. And after the worship service, outside is still the safest place to fellowship, and you can do that. If you are uncomfortable attending worship in person, we do continue to have a live stream available during the service, live at 10 a.m., but you can watch that later in the day and later in the week. And I want to say, too, that people have strong feelings about COVID safety measures. People in our church have strong feelings about this. And let's face it, COVID stinks, right? It's robbed us of a lot of things over the past 18 months, certain amounts of fellowship and friendship and freedom, and for some of us, health, and some of us, even loved ones. And many have made sacrifices in order to love our neighbors well over these last 18 months, and still a lot of us are weary. But we're grateful that as a church, we've remained largely unified throughout this pandemic. And, by God's grace, we hope that continues. And so if you've got questions, if you've got concerns, feel free to contact me, contact our council chair, Clarence, the COVID safety team, Elaine, Lorraine, and Jody. And people, please keep praying in the midst of COVID. It really matters. And as I close, here's another thing the Catechism has to say about God's providence. It asks us in question and answer 28, what does it benefit us to know that God has created all this and still upholds them by his providence? And the answer is, we can be patient in adversity, thankful in prosperity, and with a view to the future, we can have a firm confidence in our faithful God and Father that no creature shall separate us from his love. For all creatures are so completely in his hand that without his will, they cannot so much as move. And so, friends in Christ, may the providence of God sustain you, and may the peace of Christ be with you all.